She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming, she was just standing there barefoot, bruised, forgotten next to the man who stole her voice. No toys, no comfort, just silence. But Max saw what no one else did. A retired K9 German Shepherd, trained to chase danger, now standing face to face with the quietest call for help. What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith in loyalty, instinct, and love. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe every child deserves to be heard, if you believe every dog deserves a second chance, hit that subscribe button, because this story won't leave you. It was one of those cold mornings that settled deep in the bones of Willow Creek, a small mountain town in Colorado where winter always overstayed its welcome. Snow flurries drifted lazily in the pale air as a silver sky hung low above the peaks. The streets were quiet, patches of black ice clinging stubbornly to the pavement despite the salt. At 8:45 a.m., the parking lot of Willow Mart looked almost serene, save for the hum of old pickup trucks and the occasional scrape of shopping carts on slush. Officer Caleb Hayes stepped out of his patrol SUV and let the door shut behind him with a soft click. He was 38, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair trimmed military short and sharp gray eyes that had seen more than they cared to remember. A scar curved beneath his left ear, barely visible, a silent souvenir from his years in the Marines. Since leaving the military and joining the Willow Creek Police Department, Caleb had become a fixture in the town's stoic, fair, quiet. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it felt like spring. Walking at his side, as always, was Max. Max was a German Shepherd, male, 8 years old, large for his breed but not bulky. His frame was all muscle and poise. His coat was black and rich tan, thickened from the mountain cold, and his amber eyes flicked across the parking lot with focused precision. One ear stood upright. The other, slightly folded at the top, was the result of an old injury from a K9 deployment during a failed meth lab raid in the nearby hills. A faded scar lined his right flank, barely visible under the fur but always present. He moved like a ghost, silent, fluid, alert. Max hadn't always belonged to Caleb. He had been a police K9, one of the best in the state, until an explosion during a search operation nearly cost him his life. He was retired, scheduled for placement into a working dog program out of state. Caleb had signed the release forms, but when he visited Max in the kennel afterward, something shifted. The dog, still bandaged and half sedated, had rested his head against Caleb's boot, and Caleb had felt something click into place in his chest that hadn't settled since his brother died. Max was named for Caleb's younger brother, Lance Corporal Max Hayes, who was killed in action in Afghanistan 6 years earlier. Naming the dog after him wasn't impulsive, it was sacred. It was the way Caleb carried his brother forward, in silence, in loyalty, in the unseen battles that still lived under his skin. Max had been his partner ever since. The automatic doors of Willow Mart slid open with a mechanical sigh. The scent of warm bread and cleaning fluid greeted them. Caleb gave a polite nod to Sarah Landry, the store's manager, who stood behind the front counter organizing receipts. Sarah was a wiry woman in her late 50s, always dressed in jeans and a zip-up vest over a long-sleeve flannel. She had a tight bun, sharp cheekbones, and the exhausted grace of someone who'd lived through too many midnights. 10 years ago, she lost her only child to a drunk driver. Since then, she'd rarely spoken about anything personal. Caleb tipped his hat. "Morning, Sarah." "Snow's not letting up," she said without looking up. "Figures. You're just in time. Some kid knocked over a cereal display an hour ago. Floor staff's still recovering emotionally." Caleb smirked faintly and continued past the produce aisle. Max padded beside him, eyes constantly moving, ears swiveling at every sudden noise. The store was quiet today. Too quiet. They reached aisle 12, boxed cereals, granola bars, and powdered milk. That's when Max stopped. He didn't growl at first. He simply froze. At the far end of the aisle stood a man. He was tall, around 6'2", early 40s, white. His brown leather jacket was frayed at the cuffs, and his jeans were dirty, stained dark at the knees. Long, greasy hair was slicked back over a narrow forehead. Tattoos wrapped his arms in a tangle of black ink. His eyes were sunken, and he had the posture of someone used to looking over his shoulder. Next to him stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. Thin, alarmingly so. Her blonde hair was tangled, sticking to her cheeks and collar. She wore a short-sleeved floral dress that looked like it belonged to summer, not winter. Her legs were bare, her knees scraped, and her feet red and cracked were bare on the cold supermarket tiles. Her face was pale, lips chapped, and her eyes, they were dark and hollow, as if she'd used up all her tears and had none left to give. Max growled. A deep, low rumble reverberated through his chest. Caleb instinctively tightened the leash. The man looked up briefly. "Problem, officer?" he asked casually. "Just passing through," Caleb replied, his tone measured. Max pulled slightly, but not in aggression. He moved toward the girl, not barking now, just alert, ears forward, tail lowered in neutral curiosity. He paused about a foot away and began to sniff, starting at her ankles, moving up toward her shoulder. The girl didn't flinch. Then she looked at Caleb, just a flick of the eyes, and slowly she raised her right hand. Her palm faced outward, her thumb folded in, then her fingers curled over it. The universal hand signal for distress, a silent call for help. Caleb's chest tightened. He knew that sign. Every officer in the department had been trained to recognize it, but seeing it, from a child, in a grocery store? Max sat down. His eyes shifted back to Caleb, not pleading, not questioning, certain. Caleb didn't say anything. He just exhaled, slowly, and placed one hand on the radio clipped to his vest. He had seen the signal, but Max had heard it first. The moment Sophie lowered her hand and the signal was made, something in Max changed. His ears snapped forward, and a low whimper came from his throat, barely audible, but loaded with urgency. Caleb saw it in the dog's body before he even turned to look back at the girl. Max was ready to move. And then Wayne, the man with the tattoos and leather jacket, tightened his grip on Sophie's thin arm and began walking her toward the front of the store. Caleb didn't move at first. He knew better than to act on instinct alone, but Max did not wait. With one hard tug, Max yanked the leash from Caleb's hand. It slipped through his glove like butter, and the dog was off silent, fast, low to the ground. Caleb snapped to life and followed, weaving past confused shoppers and catching up just as the glass doors of Willow Mart slid open into the icy air. Snow had begun to fall again, heavier now. The wind bit at Caleb's face as he spotted Max dashing across the parking lot, headed straight for the rear end of a dented, ash-gray sedan. Wayne had just opened the back door. Sophie was hesitating, one foot already inside the car. She looked back, not at Wayne, but at Max. The shepherd had stopped just short of the vehicle, not growling this time, just standing there, tense but calm, as if unwilling to let her disappear without a fight. Caleb jogged up behind them. "Everything okay here, sir?" Caleb called, slowing to a steady walk as he approached. He didn't want to spook Wayne, not yet. Wayne turned, his features tightening. "Yeah," he said. "Just taking my niece home. Bit of a rough morning. She gets nervous in crowds." Caleb studied him up close now. The man was taller than he'd looked in the store, and leaner, too wiry, with deep lines carved into his cheeks and yellowed eyes that didn't match the friendliness in his tone. His hands were rough, grease-stained, fingernails bitten down to the quick. The girl hadn't moved. "What's her name?" Caleb asked. "Sophie," Wayne replied too quickly. "Last name?" "Carter." Caleb's gut twisted. Carter. It felt familiar. He looked at Sophie. She was still barefoot, her small frame shaking now under the snow, arms wrapped tightly across her chest. Max stepped forward slowly, then sat between Caleb and the car door. Wayne's jaw ticked. "You need something else, officer?" Caleb kept his tone even. "Just your plate number. Routine check-in. We've had some incidents with unregistered vehicles lately." Wayne nodded, a little too tight. "Sure, I get it." He moved toward the front of the car. Caleb used the moment to lean slightly toward Sophie and whisper, "You did good, sweetheart. I saw you." She blinked. It was the first sign of a living reaction Caleb had seen on her face. Wayne returned a second later, rubbing his hands together. "Look, we've got to go. She's freezing." "Of course," Caleb said. "You take care now." Wayne ushered Sophie inside, closed the back door, then climbed in himself. The sedan started with a wheeze and jerked slightly before pulling out onto the road. Caleb knelt beside Max. The dog's hackles had lowered, but his eyes stayed on the car as it drove away. "Let's see where he's taking her." They got back into the patrol SUV. Caleb entered the plate into the onboard system and began trailing the sedan at a distance. The streets grew quieter as they left the town center. Soon, Wayne turned off onto a cracked side road that wound past shuttered diners and snow-dusted trailers. After 10 more minutes, He pulled into a small gravel lot in front of a rundown single-level building with green paint peeling from its siding. Green Pines Motor Lodge. The kind of place paid by cash, not card. Caleb kept his distance, parking at the far corner of the lot and turning off his headlights. He watched as Wayne led Sophie into one of the rooms number 104. The door shut behind them with a hollow thud. Max sat up in the passenger seat, ears high. "Yeah," Caleb muttered. "Me too." The building itself looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years. A crooked neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly under a bent metal awning. One of the windows near room 104 was covered with a sheet instead of a curtain. No other cars were in the lot. It was likely Wayne was the only tenant. Caleb grabbed his tablet, connected to the department's system, and entered the license plate from memory. A moment later, the screen flashed. No active registration found. Plate not in database. Frowning, Caleb searched for any local licenses tied to the name Wayne Tucker. Nothing. He tried again with Sophie Carter. This time, something pinged. A missing persons bulletin issued 3 weeks ago. Sophie Carter, age 6. Last seen with mother, Rachel Carter. Both missing from this town of Estes Ridge, 47 miles north. No official sightings since. Caleb sat back. Max let out a low rumble beside him. Caleb picked up his radio and called dispatch. Unit 12 requesting assistance, verifying ID of potential suspect and minor. Current location, Green Pines Motor Lodge, room 104. Possible link to active missing persons case. Sending vehicle and facial image captures now. Copy Unit 12. We'll follow up. Max leaned his head toward the windshield and whined softly. "Hang tight, buddy," Caleb said. "We're not leaving her." The wind rattled the SUV's frame, and the falling snow had begun to stick in patches along the edges of the lot. Max watched the door of room 104 as if he expected it to open at any moment. But it didn't. Inside that room, a girl was missing. Not just on paper, not just legally. She was missing from safety, missing from kindness, missing from warmth. Max had seen it before Caleb had. And now they were both watching that door like it held the key to everything broken. The next morning, the snow had hardened into icy patches across the sidewalks and parking lots of Willow Creek. Wind bit at the corners of Officer Caleb Hayes' jacket as he parked discreetly across the street from Green Pines Motor Lodge. It was just past 6:45 a.m., and the town was still quiet, save for the occasional plow grinding down Main Street. The same ash-gray sedan sat parked in front of Unit 104, its front bumper tilted downward like it had lost a fight with time. No lights were on inside the room, no movement behind the cheap curtains. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was empty. But Caleb knew better. And so did Max. The German Shepherd sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the motel door with unwavering focus. The early sun cut across his fur, revealing the age in his coat, the specks of white along his muzzle, the softened muscle of his shoulders. But none of it dulled the tension in his body. He wasn't tired. He was waiting. Caleb didn't approach the room. Not yet. He needed more than instinct to justify a knock. He needed evidence. After radioing in his current location and confirming that no units were available to assist yet, he stepped out of the car, tugged his beanie lower over his ears, and motioned for Max to follow. They walked around the perimeter of the motel grounds slowly. The snow crunched beneath their boots and paws. A sagging wooden fence circled the back of the property, and a large, rusted dumpster sat beside it, half buried in snow and emitting the sour tang of old meat and cleaner. Max's ears perked as they neared. "Go ahead," Caleb whispered. Max didn't hesitate. He pulled gently at the leash and stepped to the side of the dumpster, nose working the snow-dusted ground. After just a few seconds, he stopped, head lowering, tail held still. Caleb followed, crouching beside him. There, lying partially beneath a ripped trash bag, was a small, stained sock pink with a faded cartoon unicorn on the side. A dark, dried crust stained the toe. Caleb lifted it carefully with a tissue, his mouth tightening. Blood. He tucked it into an evidence bag and looked around again. Still no movement from 104. Still no sound. It was like the world had pressed pause on this little corner of town. After circling back toward his vehicle, Caleb decided to check the only open business nearby. Rusty Spin Laundry, a coin laundromat a block away. The place had been around for decades, its orange-painted exterior now chipped and faded. The windows were fogged from the dryers working overtime inside. It opened early, 6 a.m., sharp, and was usually staffed by the same person each day. The bell jingled as he entered, and the warmth hit like a wave. Behind the folding counter stood Martha Lee, 61 years old, petite and hunched from years of standing. Her gray hair was tied in a messy bun, and her hands were rough with detergent burns. Martha had lived in Willow Creek most of her life and knew everyone, along with every roomer. She glanced up from her crossword puzzle with tired curiosity. "Well, if it isn't Officer Hayes. Trouble with your uniform or just freezing?" "Morning, Martha. Neither, just looking for someone." "Someone in trouble?" "Possibly." Caleb stepped closer and showed her the photo from the missing persons bulletin. Sophie, wearing a purple t-shirt and smiling faintly in front of a playground slide. Martha's brow furrowed. "Have you seen her? Or the man she might be with? Tall, white, long hair, tattoos on both arms, drives a beat-up gray sedan." She tapped her pen thoughtfully. "That sounds like the guy who's been coming in the past few weeks. Doesn't talk much. Always alone, or with that girl skinny thing, quiet as a mouse. Never says a word. Doesn't even bring toys or snacks for her. Nothing. And she's always sitting near the dryers, curled up like she's afraid to take up space." "Did you ever catch a name?" "No. Paid in quarters, kept his head down, but—" Martha pointed toward a camera above the change machine. "That's been working just fine. Records the front door. Don't know if it helps." "It might," Caleb said, making a mental note to request the footage. Martha leaned in, lowering her voice. Last time they came in, she had a rip on her sleeve, and she limped. Caleb swallowed his anger and nodded. "Thanks, Martha. You've been helpful." As he stepped back outside, the cold air returned like a slap. Max was waiting near the SUV, tail twitching, eyes scanning. "Let's go, boy," Caleb muttered. "We're building the picture." Back inside the patrol vehicle, Caleb pieced together what little he had. A missing girl last seen with her mother, now likely being kept by an unknown male using a false name. A sock with dried blood. No record of the sedan in any DMV database. A laundromat witness confirming suspicious behavior, but it still wasn't enough for a warrant or forced entry. And inside that room, Sophie was invisible. No laughter, no toys, no movement, like she didn't exist. Max rested his head on the window, watching again. There was no point calling her name. She didn't have one here, not in room 104, not under Wayne's rules. But Caleb would find it again, and give it back to her. The wind had picked up by the time Officer Caleb Hayes returned to his SUV. Snow flurries whipped sideways through the parking lot of the Green Pines Motor Lodge, and clouds hung low like lead over the skeletal trees at the edge of town. Max sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his eyes never leaving room 104. The dog hadn't moved since they'd returned from the laundromat. He was alert but quiet, like he was holding his breath. Caleb shut the door and turned up the heater, fingers flexing around a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee he'd picked up from the corner gas station. The moment the warmth touched his skin, the exhaustion he'd been denying all night began to press in. He rubbed at his temples and pulled up the missing persons bulletin again on his tablet. Rachel Carter, age 30, blonde, 5'6", last seen wearing blue hospital scrubs. Reported missing by her landlord 3 weeks ago when she failed to return after a shift. She had one daughter, Sophie. Caleb scrolled further. Attached to the report was a scanned intake form from the Willow Haven Women's Support Center, time-stamped 5 days before her disappearance. On it, Rachel had written a short note. "I'm being followed. I need to disappear until I can keep my daughter safe." Then nothing. That was the last paper trail she'd left. Caleb leaned back in his seat, jaw tight. Most people thought missing person cases began with flashing red lights and helicopters, but more often, they began just like this. Quietly, slowly, in parking lots, in whispers. Max gave a low grunt and stood, his eyes narrowing toward the side of the building. Caleb followed his gaze and saw a man in his 60s walking toward a rusted Ford pickup near room 102. The man moved slowly, favoring one leg, his back hunched under a quilted brown jacket. He wore a dark knit cap and puffed from a cigar that hung from the corner of his mouth. "Let's ask around," Caleb muttered. He stepped out of the SUV, Max close behind, and approached the man. "Morning, sir. I'm Officer Hayes with Willow Creek PD. You staying here?" The man paused, squinting at him. His face was weathered and sun-spotted, with deep lines around his mouth that looked permanent. "Name's Lester Rowe. Been renting 102 since last May. You looking for someone?" "Maybe. The man in 104 Wayne. You seen him around?" Lester pulled the cigar from his lips. "That the guy with the girl?" Caleb's eyebrows lifted. "You've seen the girl?" Lester nodded slowly. "Scrawny thing. Never speaks. Always walking behind him like a damn shadow. Didn't see her at first. Then one night I hear a sound like crying, real soft. Looked out the window, and there she was, sitting on the curb in the cold. He came out, grabbed her by the arm, pulled her back in." Lester shook his head. "Didn't sit right with me." Caleb kept his voice calm. "You ever see anyone else go in or out of that room?" Lester scratched his beard. "A woman once, tall, blonde, looked sick, like she hadn't slept in days. She came out holding her stomach like it hurt. That was, hell, must have been over 2 weeks ago. Haven't seen her since." That made Caleb pause. "Did you catch her name?" "Nope, but she dropped something. I saw it the next morning when I went out to dump my ashtray. Looked like a hospital bracelet." Caleb's pulse ticked up. "Do you remember where?" "Out back, next to the dumpster." Caleb nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Rowe. That helps." Lester grunted and climbed into his truck. Max was already tugging at the leash, heading toward the rear lot. Caleb followed him around the corner where the snow had thinned to slush. Behind the row of rooms, the ground turned into a narrow strip of dead grass and broken glass. The motel's dumpster sat under a leaning chain-link fence, its lid barely closed. Max trotted to a patch of weeds and began to sniff. Within moments he stopped, lowered his head, and nudged something buried in the wet gravel with his nose. Caleb knelt and brushed the debris aside. A slim, crumpled white bracelet glinted faintly in the snow. He lifted it carefully. The lettering was faded, but still legible. R. Carter, Estes Ridge Community Hospital, dated 4 weeks ago. "Jesus," Caleb muttered. Max sat beside him, tail still, breathing heavy in the cold. Caleb sealed the bracelet into an evidence pouch and stood, his thoughts racing. If Rachel had been here and everything suggested she had, then she wasn't just hiding, she'd been taken, and she hadn't left on her own. Back in the SUV, Caleb started typing a report for preliminary documentation, attaching the bracelet photo and Lester's witness statement. He knew it still wasn't enough to kick in the door, but it was close. Very close. He radioed dispatch. "This is Unit 12. I'm requesting a formal welfare check authorization on room 104 at Green Pines Motor Lodge. Suspected involvement in a missing persons case. Suspect is Wayne, alias unknown, 40s, possibly armed. Victims may include minor female and adult female, Rachel Carter. Evidence found on site suggests prolonged unlawful detainment." "Copy that, Unit 12, came the voice of Sergeant Vanessa Wells, a calm, clipped tone. "Prepping paperwork now. ETA for social services backup is 45 minutes. Hold position." Vanessa Wells was Caleb's superior, a firm but fair officer in her mid-40s with sharp cheekbones, light brown skin, and a reputation for composure. She'd served with distinction in Denver before relocating to Willow Creek after her husband's death, seeking quieter work. But even in this small town, she maintained the instincts of a city officer. Caleb turned off the radio. Max was still watching the motel. "She's in there," Caleb said softly. "And now we know her mother was too." He didn't speak for a long while, just sat with his hand on Max's neck, the silence between them full of the weight of every unanswered question. They'd found Rachel's name. Now they needed to find Rachel. The clouds over Willow Creek had thickened into a dull, oppressive ceiling by the time Officer Caleb Hayes stepped out of his SUV once more and adjusted his duty belt. Max hopped out silently beside him, fur bristling at the cold and tension in the air. They stood in front of the Green Pines Motor Lodge just yards away from Unit 104, the door that had haunted them for 2 days straight. From the opposite side of the lot, a dark blue county vehicle rolled in and parked. Out stepped Vanessa Reyes, the lead social worker assigned to child protection in the Tri-County region. Vanessa was in her early 40s, tall and athletic, with short black curls tucked under a gray beanie and intelligent brown eyes that rarely blinked when facing confrontation. Her calm demeanor often masked a ferocious determination to protect the most vulnerable. Dressed in a quilted navy coat and charcoal slacks, she walked with a clipboard in one hand and a badge clipped to her belt. "Officer Hayes," she greeted him, her voice smooth and controlled. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Caleb replied. She's still in there. Vanessa glanced at Max, who stood as still as a statue beside Caleb, his gaze never leaving the door to 104. He knows. He always does. They approached the room together. The paint around the doorframe was chipped, and the number 104 hung at a crooked angle, one nail rusted halfway out. Caleb knocked twice, firm but non-threatening. Footsteps sounded from within, heavy, deliberate. The door creaked open to reveal Wayne, dressed now in a faded black hoodie and jeans, barefoot despite the cold air leaking through the doorway. He rubbed one eye as if woken from sleep, though his pupils said otherwise, sharp, alert, calculating. "Can I help you?" Wayne asked, eyes flicking between Caleb and Vanessa. Vanessa stepped forward. "Good morning, sir. My name is Vanessa Reyes, with Child Protective Services. This is Officer Hayes. We've received a report and need to verify the welfare of a minor in your care." Wayne didn't blink. "You mean Sophie, my niece? She's sleeping." Vanessa maintained a polite tone. "That's fine. We just need to see her briefly to ensure she's okay. Standard procedure." Wayne's jaw tightened, but his expression didn't shift. "She had a rough night. Doesn't sleep well in new places. Can't you come back later?" "I'm afraid we can't. This won't take more than a minute." Wayne hesitated, fingers curling around the edge of the door. Behind him, the room was dimly lit. A single lamp cast yellow light across a cluttered, space-empty takeout boxes, a broken folding chair, a stained mattress on the floor. No signs of a child. Finally, he stepped aside. "Fine. Come in." Vanessa entered first, scanning the room with a trained eye. Caleb followed, Max beside him, the dog's body taut like a stretched bowstring. "Where's Sophie?" Caleb asked, tone steady. Wayne gestured toward a closed door at the end of the room. "She's in there. Bathroom. She said her stomach hurt." Vanessa moved toward the door but paused mid-step. Her eyes dropped to the floor, to a set of faint drag marks in the dust and grime like something, or someone, had been pulled across the cheap linoleum. "Did she walk in there herself?" Vanessa asked, voice casual. Wayne hesitated. "Yeah." "Why?" But Max had already broken the silence. A sharp, aggressive bark tore from his throat as he lunged toward the door. Caleb barely held him back. The dog's ears were flat, and he stared directly at the door handle, snarling now in bursts. Wayne stepped back, startled. "What the hell is his problem?" Vanessa didn't answer. She crouched down, reached out, and touched the floor where the drag marks ended. Her fingers came away smudged with something dark. "She's not just sick," she said quietly. Caleb stood straight. "Mr. Tucker, we need you to unlock that door." "There's nothing wrong," Wayne snapped. "She's just resting. You can't barge in." "I can," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "Because we have evidence a minor in your care may be in danger. Open the door, now." Wayne's mask cracked just a little. His eyes flicked between them again. He licked his lips, and for a second it looked like he might bolt. Caleb placed a hand on his holster, not yet drawing. "Don't do anything stupid." Wayne huffed and turned toward the door. His key jangled as he fumbled with the lock. The moment it clicked, Max lunged again, barking so violently it echoed through the walls. Caleb opened the door carefully. Inside, the air was sour and thick. The small bathroom had no window, just a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. In the far corner, curled up against the wall, was Sophie. She wore the same floral dress, now dirtier and torn at the hem. Her knees were hugged to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins. She didn't look up. Her breathing was shallow, lips pale, eyes dull. Caleb took a step forward, then knelt. "Sophie," he said softly. She flinched, her gaze jumping to his face, then to Max behind him. The dog let out a low whimper, his body crouched as if he wanted to go to her. Vanessa stepped into the room and crouched beside Caleb. "Hi, sweetheart," she said gently. "We're here to help. You're safe now, okay?" Sophie blinked. Then very slowly she nodded. Max whined again. "Let him," Caleb whispered. He loosened the leash. Max stepped into the bathroom with the care of a nurse, approached Sophie, and pressed his nose to her hand. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, her fingers reached out and curled slightly into his fur. Caleb turned to Vanessa. "We need medics, and we need a warrant. There's more going on here." Wayne stood frozen outside the door, pale and silent now. Caleb stepped toward him. "You're done," he said quietly. The knock on the door of room 104 the second time was not a request, it was a declaration. By the time the order came down, Caleb Hayes was already waiting at the threshold, gloved hand poised, Max at his side like a coiled spring. Sergeant Vanessa Wells had arrived minutes earlier, her presence commanding despite her calm demeanor. Mid-40s, mixed race, and wearing a full Navy winter uniform, she stood with her boots firmly planted on the icy pavement, clipboard in hand, sidearm holstered but not forgotten. Vanessa had seen enough over 2 decades in law enforcement to know that silence often screamed the loudest. When she met Caleb's eyes, no words were needed. The warrant was official. Inside, Wayne Tucker paced the threadbare carpet of the motel room like a trapped animal. His hoodie clung to his frame and sweat dotted his forehead despite the chill in the air. The moment he heard the key in the lock, he bolted toward the window, but Caleb and another officer, Deputy Liz Romero, a stout, quick-thinking Latina in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a reputation for never hesitating, burst through the door before he had a chance to move further. Liz was the one who tackled him, wrestling him to the ground as he shouted protests and curses. "Get off me! I didn't do anything. She was mine to protect." "Then why is she hiding in a closet?" Vanessa's voice was ice. Wayne's wrists were cuffed behind his back within seconds. His breathing was erratic, but he offered no real resistance as Liz read him his rights. Meanwhile, Max wasn't looking at Wayne. He had already locked onto the closed door to the bathroom again. Without being commanded, he trotted over and began pawing at it, letting out a frustrated bark. Caleb crossed the room quickly and opened it. The stench hit first antiseptic, mold, unwashed skin, and something sour, like old fear. The single overhead bulb flickered dimly, casting shadows across cracked tiles and peeling paint. In the far corner of the small, windowless room, wedged between a half-broken sink and an old bucket, lay a woman. Rachel Carter. She was thin, her arms mottled with purple bruises, wrists red and raw where zip ties had once cut deep. Her hair was matted, and one eye was swollen nearly shut. She blinked at the sudden light and tried to sit up, but collapsed again, groaning softly. Caleb immediately knelt beside her and spoke gently. "Rachel, my name is Caleb Hayes. You're safe now. Help is here." Her lips parted, but no sound came out, just a hoarse exhale. She looked past him at Max, who stood beside them, whining quietly. Vanessa stepped inside next, radio already in hand. "We need EMS at Green Pines Unit 104. 1 adult female, multiple contusions, signs of restraint and dehydration, conscious but weak." While Vanessa coordinated medical response, Max began sniffing around the edges of the room. Caleb noticed it too. He wasn't content. There was more. "Go, Max," Caleb said softly. The shepherd moved toward the wardrobe outside the bathroom, his tail straight, ears forward. He began to bark, not aggressively, but with purpose. Caleb stood and approached. The closet was jammed shut, the bottom wedged with an old towel. He tugged it free and opened the door. Inside, in the darkness, was Sophie. She was crouched in the far corner of the closet, arms wrapped around her legs, her face streaked with dirt and tears. The smell of antiseptic was strongest here. Wayne had kept something nearby, probably to mask other odors. Her small body trembled violently. Max stepped in first. He didn't bark, he just whined, then lowered his head, gently licking her scratched knuckles. Sophie looked at him, her eyes wide. Then, for the first time since Caleb had seen her, she moved voluntarily, slowly reaching out to touch the top of Max's head. The gesture was small, but seismic. Caleb crouched beside them. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're not leaving without you." Sophie looked at him now, and something in her eyes, though still broken, still uncertain, shifted. She blinked, then nodded. He lifted her gently, wrapping a soft blanket from the cruiser around her thin frame. Her ribs were visible through her dress. She didn't speak, but she didn't resist. Rachel, half conscious in the bathroom, stirred. "Sophie," she croaked. Sophie's head turned toward the voice. "Mommy?" she whispered. Rachel began to cry. So did Vanessa. Paramedics arrived within minutes, a team of 2 led by Mike Lassiter, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with a gray beard and fatherly warmth. Mike moved carefully as he examined Rachel, checking her vitals while quietly speaking words of reassurance. His younger partner, Dana Hu, was meticulous and fast, wrapping Sophie in a warming blanket and placing her gently onto a portable stretcher. Wayne, still handcuffed and now sitting silently in the corner, said nothing. His expression was blank vacant in a way that disturbed Caleb more than rage would have. Vanessa walked over and crouched in front of him. "You kept them locked up. You plan to take legal custody. How long were you going to pretend you were her father? Wayne didn't respond, but Caleb saw the file open on his old laptop, dozens of scanned documents, forged birth certificates, school applications. A fake life, built piece by piece. He was going to disappear with her, Vanessa muttered. He almost did, Caleb replied. As the ambulance doors shut behind Sophie and Rachel, Max let out a long, heavy sigh and sat beside Caleb's boots. He didn't need praise. He didn't need recognition. He just watched as the ones he'd fought for were taken somewhere safe. For the first time in days, Caleb let himself breathe. They were out. The transition from captivity to care was not as simple as a change in location. It began with a silence so complete it felt holy, like snow falling on the ruins of something once sacred. Sophie Carter and her mother Rachel were taken that same night to the Willow Creek Family Respite Center, a modest but warm facility nestled behind a community church just beyond the town square. It was run by a woman named Sarah Whitmore, a lean, tall woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair, usually tied into a loose bun, and a voice as calm as snowfall. Sarah had been widowed young and had devoted her life to helping those who had no place else to go. Her kindness wasn't performative, it had teeth, the kind of quiet resilience that came from burying a husband and raising 2 sons during hard winters without heat. Rachel was taken straight into the medical wing of the center, where Dr. Ellen Grady, a gentle, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with cropped gray hair and a fondness for lavender scarves, began treating her injuries. Ellen didn't ask questions. She only said, "We'll start with the swelling and work from there." Rachel, barely able to lift her own arm, nodded with grateful tears. Sophie, meanwhile, was shown to a small room near the end of the hallway walls painted light blue, a handmade quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. There were no locks, no shadows, but the freedom unsettled her more than confinement had. She sat on the edge of the bed with her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, rocking in silence. The social worker, Vanessa, crouched gently at eye level and placed a box of crayons and a small notepad on the nightstand. "If you feel like drawing, sweetheart, anything you want." Sophie didn't move. Her eyes were wide, pupils still too big, like a startled fawn. No words came, no cries, no laughter. It wasn't until 2 days later, when Caleb arrived with Max, that something shifted. The German shepherd entered the center's courtyard first, his amber eyes alert but calm, tail flicking once as he passed through the main gate. He wore no vest this time, no badge, only a red bandana tied loosely around his neck, its faded pattern fluttering as he walked. He paused at the glass doors, nose twitching. Inside, Sophie sat on the floor near a window, the same window she stared through every day without really seeing anything. Caleb approached quietly, knelt down beside her. "He's here," he said gently. Sophie blinked once, then slowly turned her head. Her breath caught in her throat. Then, without warning, she scrambled off the floor and ran. Max didn't move. He stood perfectly still until Sophie reached him. And then she hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck, burying her face into his fur. Caleb stepped back, his throat tightening. He saw it, the miracle he hadn't dared hope for. Her lips curled into a smile. It was slight, trembling, but real. Sarah Whitmore, who had been watching from the doorway with a mug of herbal tea in hand, let out a soft breath. "I haven't seen her react to anyone like that," she murmured. "She trusts him," Caleb said, "more than anyone else right now." Max sat down as Sophie stayed curled beside him, her small hand resting on his shoulder, like he was the only solid thing in a world that had fallen apart. Later, she would pick up the notepad Vanessa had left and with trembling hands draw a picture of Max beside her in a field of flowers. It was crude and childlike, but it had meaning. And then, just a few minutes before lunch, she picked up a pencil stub from the drawer, turned to the first clean page in the notebook, and began slowly writing the letters of her name, S-O-P-H-I-E. Each stroke was careful, slightly wobbly, but when she finished, she looked up at Sarah and whispered, "Can I have a pink crayon?" It was the first sentence she had spoken aloud. Rachel, meanwhile, was healing in more ways than just physical. The bruises faded slower than the shame, but Dr. Ellen and Nurse Jada Ann, upbeat young woman with braided hair and a contagious laugh, made sure she was never alone. Rachel opened up in bits and pieces, about the manipulation, the isolation, how Wayne had promised safety, and instead delivered terror. Caleb visited regularly, not in uniform but in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, his badge tucked away. He brought a thermos of cocoa once, which Sarah pretended not to notice when Sophie asked for a second cup. But what he brought most consistently, what mattered most, was Max. The dog didn't act like a hero. He didn't need to. He would simply find Sophie each visit, settle near her, and wait. Sometimes she would read to him, halting, slow, her voice barely above a whisper. Other times she would just curl against his side and draw. One afternoon, while watching them from the bench outside the therapy room, Caleb said softly to Sarah, "He was supposed to retire this year." Sarah glanced at him, curious. "But he didn't?" Caleb shook his head. "He refused to stop working after our last call. It was like he knew, like he was waiting for someone." She smiled. "Looks like he found her." Later that week, Caleb sat with Rachel in the recreation room. She was stronger now, her wrists still wrapped but her posture firmer. They didn't speak much, but Caleb placed a copy of her file on the table between them. "He's being charged with unlawful imprisonment, abuse, forgery, and attempted custodial interference. There's no way he'll see light for a long time," Caleb said. Rachel nodded. Her eyes, once dulled by pain, now flickered with something fiercer. "Thank you for believing us." "I didn't," Caleb admitted. "Max did." That night, as twilight blanketed Willow Creek in a soft lavender hue, Sophie and Max sat on the porch of the respite center. She had drawn a heart around their names, Max and Sophie, then fallen asleep with her head resting on his shoulder. Max remained perfectly still, his breath rising and falling in rhythm with hers. Inside, Rachel stood at the window, hand pressed against the glass. Behind her, Sarah handed her a folded set of papers. "What's this?" Rachel asked. Sarah smiled. "A new beginning." It had been 3 months since the night Sophie Carter was found behind the locked bathroom door, and already Willow Creek felt like a different town. The snow had melted into soft spring soil, the trees lining the sidewalks bloomed in cautious pinks and whites, and on the first Monday of May, sunlight spilled across the front steps of Willow Creek Elementary like a quiet promise. The school had dressed itself for the occasion with paper butterflies taped to every classroom window and chalk rainbows drawn across the front walk. Rachel Carter stood just off to the side of the crowd, wearing a modest lavender blouse and slate gray trousers. Her face was thinner, her eyes older, but there was peace there, earned, fragile, but real. Her hands, still carrying the memory of healing bruises, clutched a paper program for the first grade spring ceremony. Just 3 rows ahead, Caleb Hayes sat in uniform, his badge polished to a warm gleam, but his eyes kept flicking down, not to his notes, not to his phone, but to the large German shepherd lying quietly at his feet. Max, now officially retired, wore no vest today. Instead, he had a soft leather collar with a gold-plated tag that read, "Honorary K9, Retired Service Dog, Max Hayes." His coat had regained some of its shine, though the scar on his side was still visible in the sunlight. His ears were relaxed, his body still, but every once in a while his tail gave a soft wag, almost like a heartbeat. On stage, a line of first graders waited their turn behind a makeshift wooden podium. Sophie stood at the end of the row, wearing a pale yellow dress with small embroidered daisies and a red ribbon woven into each of her braided pigtails. She held a folded piece of paper tightly in both hands. She looked different now. Not completely, not impossibly, but enough. The bones of her cheeks had filled out. Her skin had color, her shoes fit. There was still a wariness in her stance, but it had been dulled by time and trust. Mrs. Garland, the school's music and language arts teacher, an energetic woman in her late 40s with curly auburn hair and a floral scarf tied dramatically around her neck, stepped up to the mic. "Our next reader is someone very special to us," she said warmly, glancing at Sophie and offering a gentle nod of encouragement. "Sophie Carter has prepared a poem she wrote herself. She titled it, 'The Hero Who Didn't Talk.'" The crowd quieted. A few parents shifted in their seats, some squinted against the sun, and a teacher near the back raised her phone to record. Rachel pressed her hand over her mouth. Caleb looked at Max, then forward, and Max simply blinked and waited. Sophie walked to the podium. Her footsteps were careful but sure. She unfolded her paper slowly, the corner fluttering in the breeze. Then, with a steady voice, not loud, but clear, she began to read. "He didn't speak like people do. No words, no songs, no sounds that grew. He didn't laugh, he didn't cry, but still, he saw when others lie. He barked when no one else would care. He stood beside me when none were there. He didn't ask for gold or praise, just stayed with me through darkest days. And though he cannot write or spell, he knows my truth and guards it well. A hero's not just big or strong, but one who helps you right what's wrong. So if you see him, don't walk past. That dog, that heart, that tail that wags, he's more than fur or teeth or bone. He made this place feel like a home. The silence after the last line was not empty. It was sacred. A few parents wiped their eyes. Rachel let out a slow, shuddering breath. Caleb lowered his head slightly, pressing his thumb gently against the edge of Max's collar. And Max, as if hearing his own name in the rhythm of Sophie's voice, wagged his tail just once, slowly. Sophie stepped down, not looking left or right, and returned to her seat without fanfare. But something had shifted in that moment, something weightless and vast. She hadn't just read a poem, she had reclaimed her voice, and gifted it to the one who had barked when the world went silent. Later that evening, at their new rental home near the edge of town, Sophie sat cross-legged on her bed. The walls of her room were now pale blue, and her window looked out over the hills where the daffodils had just begun to bloom. Above her bed, taped crookedly but proudly, hung a crayon drawing of Max sitting beside a small figure in a yellow dress. Above them, in Sophie's careful block letters, read, "He barked when no one else listened." Rachel entered quietly, carrying a tray with apple slices and 2 mugs of warm milk. "For your poet laureate," she teased gently. Sophie beamed. "And Max?" Rachel set one bowl on the floor with a few dog biscuits beside it. "Of course, every hero needs a reward." As they sat together, Max curled up at the foot of the bed, his head resting on Sophie's feet, and the last light of day turned gold on the window glass. At the clinic where Rachel now worked under Dr. Ellen Grady, who had offered her the receptionist job after her recovery, people had begun to speak of the Carter women with admiration. Rachel's quiet competence and warm presence had become an anchor in the small practice. Patients trusted her. She knew what it meant to listen without judgment. And as for Caleb, he still stopped by the center every week, but now without the badge of duty. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with a puzzle book for Sophie, sometimes just to walk Max. He spoke little of the case now. Wayne Tucker had pleaded guilty, and the trial was over. But every time he looked at Sophie, he saw not a victim, but someone who had walked through darkness and learned to name her light. Sometimes miracles don't come with lightning or choirs in the sky. They come on 4 legs with a scar on their side and eyes that understand silence. Max didn't speak, but he listened when no one else did. And through him, a little girl found her voice, a mother found her strength, and a town was reminded that hope is never truly lost. This story reminds us that God works in quiet, unexpected ways, maybe through a dog, a stranger, or a second chance we didn't see coming. In a world full of noise, pain, and indifference, kindness becomes a miracle, and listening becomes an act of grace. So wherever you are right now, whether you're struggling or healing, whether you're watching this alone or surrounded by love, remember, you are not forgotten. God sees, even when no one else does. And sometimes he sends help with pause. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to comment Amen to show you believe in second chances. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded they are not alone. Subscribe to our channel if you believe animals deserve love, not pain. Leave a comment below. Has there ever been a moment when something small became your miracle? May God bless you and every silent hero still out there waiting to be found.